My husband asked me to give one of my kidneys to his mother. Prove your loyalty to this family, he said. I agreed. 4 days after the surgery, he walked into my hospital room, but he was not alone. Beside him stood a woman in a deep red dress that flowed like blood, and behind them, a nurse pushed my mother-in-law in a wheelchair. Julian tossed a brown envelope containing divorce papers onto my chest. He didn't know the most important thing, though. He didn't know where my kidney actually went. Before we dive into this story, I want to say that it is an honor to share my journey with you. I hope you find strength in these words. I lost my parents on Interstate 75 near Atlanta when I was only 9 years old. A semi-truck slammed into our car at full speed. My father didn't even have time to swerve, and my mother, sitting in the passenger seat, took the brunt of the impact. From that day on, my life was split in two. In one half, there were my mother's hands that always smelled of cocoa butter, and my father's deep laughter on Sunday mornings when he would toss me toward the ceiling and catch me at the very last second. In the other half, there was only a state-run foster home in Macon with its echoing hallways, iron cots lined up in rows, and the indifferent faces of staff who changed every 6 months and never bothered to remember our names. After I aged out of the system, I got a degree in accounting from a community college, not because I dreamed of numbers, but because it was the only program that offered a housing subsidy. Without connections or money, even a modest entry-level job remained a distant dream. Employers would look at the foster care history on my application and politely promise to call back, a call that never came. I eventually moved to Atlanta and found work as a consultant in a high-end boutique in Buckhead. The work wasn't hard and the pay was meager, but I got to spend my days surrounded by beautiful things, imagining that one day my luck would change, that fate would finally notice my hard work and give me back what it had stolen from me as a child. Julian Vane entered my life 2.5 years ago. He came in to find a gift for his mother's birthday, spent an hour sorting through silk scarves and pashminas, setting one aside then another. He was tall, confident, with that specific air of someone who had never known want and never had to check his balance before a purchase. I helped him choose a hand-painted silk wrap, never prying or pushing the most expensive items, even though I could have used the commission. He looked at me with an unexpected interest, holding my gaze longer than politeness required. "Do you always speak to customers with such calm?" he asked, paying with a black card that had no limit. "How else should I speak?" I replied. "People usually either flatter or look down on others. I try to do neither." He returned the next day for a scarf we didn't even have in stock. Then he came back again, just to talk, just to stand near the counter while I organized the new collection. A month later, he invited me to dinner at a restaurant I had only ever seen in magazines. I sat across from him, looking at a menu without prices, not understanding half the names of the dishes, unable to believe this was happening to me. An orphan from a group home whom fate had finally decided to reward. "Are you truly all alone?" he asked that night, covering my hand with his. "No family left, no one at all," I told him. "We can fix that," he whispered. We were married 6 months later in a small, quiet ceremony at a courthouse on the outskirts of the city. Julian explained it as his mother's wish not to waste money on a showy event. I didn't argue, though I secretly dreamed of a white dress and a bouquet, of photos I could hang on a wall and show my future children. But the most important thing was that I finally had a family, a home, and a man who promised to be by my side forever. Even if my mother-in-law, Beatrice Vane, looked at me with thinly veiled contempt and never missed a chance to remind me of my unfortunate background. Even if I felt like an uninvited guest in their massive estate in Alpharetta, afraid to walk down the hall or open the refrigerator without permission, I told myself I could endure it all. I would earn their love with patience and devotion, just as I had earned everything else in my life. For 2 years, I tried my hardest. I poured my soul into every detail. I cooked dinners from elaborate recipes that Beatrice barely tasted before pushing her plate away with a grimace. I bought her gifts, perfumes, jewelry, wraps, that disappeared into the depths of her walk-in closet and were never seen again. I smiled when she called me her charity case in front of guests. Then, Beatrice got sick. The diagnosis was a death sentence: chronic kidney failure, dialysis 3 times a week at a private clinic. Her heart was weakening by the month. The doctors in their expensive offices shook their heads. The wait list for a donor would take years, and she didn't have years. She had months, maybe weeks. Julian started the conversation in a hospital corridor while his mother lay behind a glass wall, hooked up to a dialysis machine. He dropped to his knees in front of me, right there on the cold tile floor, and took my hands in his. It was a gesture I had only seen in movies. "I know what I'm asking," his voice trembled. "I know it's too much, but you're the only one who can save her. You're the only one in the world. I checked your records, Amani. Remember that physical you had 6 months ago? I asked the doctors to check for a match, just in case. You're a perfect match, 1 in 1,000, and it's you." I stood there in silence, trying to process his words through the rising noise in my head. To give a kidney, a piece of my body. "What about you?" I finally asked, my voice raspy. "You're her son, her own blood. Why not you?" Julian pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. It was a medical report from a year ago, covered in stamps and signatures. Incompatibility. I was the first one tested when she was diagnosed. Do you think I would ask this of you if I could do it myself? Do you think I wouldn't give her both my kidneys if it were possible? I looked at the lines of text, the confusing abbreviations and Latin terms that meant nothing to me. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because I didn't know any other way. My whole life was built on the hope that people were fundamentally good. Julian would never ask this of me if there were any other choice. He loved me, didn't he? For 3 days, he didn't let up. He gave me no time to think, no time to talk to anyone else. He brought me coffee in bed, stroked my hair, said all the right things in the right tone. He held me so tightly I forgot to be afraid. "You'll truly be part of the family now," he whispered in the dark of our bedroom. "Not just a name on a marriage license, but blood and flesh. My mother will love you like her own daughter. I swear it. And after the surgery, we'll fly to Bora Bora, just you and me, for an entire month. You deserve the best, Amani." I imagined Beatrice's grateful smile. I imagined her hugging me for the first time without coldness. I imagined her saying, "Thank you, daughter." And the fear of the scalpel receded. I had wanted to belong to someone for so long. Here was my chance to prove my worth not with words, but with a sacrifice. "Fine," I said on the 3rd day. My own voice sounded distant. "I'll do it." Julian pulled me close, burying his face in my hair. I didn't see the triumphant smirk that crossed his lips. The day before the surgery, I was signing documents in the chief of medicine's office. The stack of papers grew higher and higher. Informed consent, waivers, protocols, each with its own number and seal. My head was throbbing from lack of sleep. The lines blurred before my eyes. "One more here," Julian said, pointing to a clause. His voice was casual, businesslike. "Standard formality for a backup plan. All hospitals require it." I read it without truly absorbing the meaning. Something about the possibility of using the organ for another patient if the primary recipient was deemed medically unfit at the last moment. What did it matter? I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to wake up a week from now when the stitches were healing and the pain was gone, and my mother-in-law would look at me with warmth. I signed the paper. The next morning, as I was wheeled down the hall on a gurney, the lights above merged into a single white streak pulsing with my heartbeat. Julian walked beside me, holding my hand. "I'll be waiting," he said at the doors of the operating room, leaning down to kiss me. "The moment you wake up, I'll be there. My face will be the first thing you see, and then Bora Bora." I wanted to say something important I had been carrying inside, but the orderly pushed the gurney forward. The last thing I remembered before the anesthesia took me under was his face in the gap of the closing doors. So familiar, so loved. or so I thought. I woke up in a different world. The ceiling above me wasn't the pristine white of the private wing Julian had promised. It was gray with uneven patches of old paint. Instead of a private suite with a view of the trees, there were 4 beds in a row. Instead of peace and quiet, there was the hacking cough of a patient by the window and the drone of a television playing a game show. The pain in my left side hit me in waves, thick and heavy, growing unbearable with every breath. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. I felt a drainage tube under my hand, disappearing under a thick gauze bandage. The touch of a foreign object in my own body made me nauseous. Where was Julian? He promised to be there. He promised his face would be the first thing I saw. The door opened on the 4th day after the surgery. Each word was a struggle for me, and I was starting to think there had been some horrific mistake. Julian walked in first, wearing a tailored navy suit, perfectly groomed, calm and collected. Behind him, an orderly pushed Beatrice in a wheelchair, draped in a cashmere shawl. And following them was a woman I had never seen before, tall, with the figure of a model, wearing a dress the color of fresh blood. She held Julian's arm with the ease of someone holding something that belonged to her by right. Julian walked to my bedside and tossed a brown envelope onto my chest. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask how I felt. The heavy paper felt cold against the thin fabric of my hospital gown. "This is for you," he said. No honey, no sweetheart, no how are you feeling. His voice sounded like he was talking to a waitress who had brought the wrong order, polite and infinitely indifferent. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and pulled out the documents. A petition for divorce filed in court 3 days ago, the very day I was on the operating table. "I don't understand," I whispered. My voice sounded thin, like a child's. "Why? I did everything you asked. Everything." Beatrice gestured for the orderly to stop and turned her chair so she could see my face clearly. She didn't want to miss a single emotion. "You did. At least you were good for that." The pale, thin face of my mother-in-law twisted into a sneer of disgusted triumph. She looked at me as one looks at a used napkin before throwing it in the trash. "Did you honestly think my son married you for love? A foster kid with nothing, no money, no education, no family to even ask where you went if you disappeared?" The monitor beside my bed began to beep frantically. The numbers on the screen jumped, but I couldn't hear them. There was a roar in my ears, drowning out the world. "You were needed because you were a match and because you had no one to ask questions. That's all. And we don't keep used goods in a house like ours." The woman in red stepped forward. A diamond the size of a marble sparkled on her ring finger. "My name is Sienna," she said with a smile that made me want to vanish. "Sienna Thorne. Julian and I have been together since college. While I was building my career in London, he found a temporary replacement with the right biological parameters." She placed a hand on her stomach, a gesture so simple and so monstrous. "The future heir to the Vane legacy is right here. The legitimate heir everyone has been waiting for. We planned this whole marriage over a year ago, as soon as Beatrice was diagnosed, and it was clear she needed a donor." Julian nodded curtly, confirming every word. The mask had completely slipped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Sienna looked at me, at my pale, pain-stricken face, at the tubes, at the divorce papers, and there wasn't a drop of pity in her eyes. Only the condescending contempt for a naive girl who was so easy to play. I lay there motionless, staring at the gray ceiling as the fragments of my world slowly, painfully, reassembled into a new, terrifying picture. 2 years of love that never existed, a marriage that was a trap from the very first meeting at the boutique, a sacrifice that meant nothing to them. I had been scouted through my medical records, tamed with pretty words, used until I was empty, and now I was being discarded as a piece of medical waste. Julian broke the silence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin stack of bills bound with a rubber band. He dropped it on the bedside table next to a carafe of water. $10,000, he said, as if settling a minor debt. Enough for a deposit on a studio while you recover. Sign the divorce papers without a fight, and we leave on good terms." I looked at the money, at that pathetic stack of paper thrown at me like a tip, and something inside me snapped. I tried to push myself up on my elbows, the pain in my side cutting through me like a hot wire. I spoke through the tears I could no longer hold back. 10,000 for my kidney? For 2 years of my life? I'm going to the police. I'm going to tell them everything. Tell them what? Julian didn't even raise his voice. That you voluntarily signed an informed consent form? Voluntarily, Amani, that's the key word. No coercion, no pressure. That's what any court will see. We have your signature on every document. Beatrice grimaced and waved her hand at the orderly. Let's go. It smells like bleach and poverty in here. It's bad for my recovery. Sienna took Julian's arm, and they walked toward the door, all three of them, never looking back. Every step they took felt like a hammer blow to my chest, shattering the last of my strength, the last of my faith in justice. Julian had his hand on the door handle when it swung open from the outside. A tall man in a white coat with graying hair walked in. He had the eyes of someone who made life and death decisions several times a day. 2 nurses followed him. "What is going on in here?" The doctor's voice cut through the air. "Who authorized subjecting a post-op patient to this kind of stress? She's only 4 days out from a nephrectomy." He shot a look at the monitor, then at my tear-streaked face, and then at the trio by the door. His eyes flashed with something close to pure disgust. "Mr. Vane, I presume?" "Dr. Bennett," Julian tried to regain his arrogance. "This is a family matter. We were just leaving." "A family matter." Bennett turned to him, and something in his gaze silenced Julian. "I'm afraid I have news for you, Mr. Vane, for all of you." He paused, and in that silence I felt a tiny, flickering spark of hope. "Your mother's transplant was canceled." The words fell into the silence of the room. No one moved. No one breathed. "What do you mean, canceled?" Beatrice's voice rose to a screech. "I feel better. I'm on the list. You feel better because of the pain management and supportive therapy," Bennett said professionally. "Immediately before the transplant, while the donor's kidney was already being prepared, your final blood work revealed an acute cardiac complication and a previously undetected infection. If we had proceeded, you would have almost certainly died on the table. The surgical board made the decision to abort the transplant." Julian's face turned the color of the hospital walls. Beatrice clutched her side. Sienna's hand flew to her mouth. "And the kidney?" Julian stammered. "What about the kidney?" "A harvested organ can only survive outside the body for a few hours," Bennett said, crossing his arms. "When the primary recipient is deemed unfit, the protocol dictates the organ be offered to the next person on the Federal Registry with compatible parameters. Thanks to a clause in the agreement your wife signed, we had full legal authority to use the organ to save another life." "That's our property!" Julian stepped toward the doctor. "We paid for the surgery. We have rights." "A human organ is not property," Bennett snapped with utter contempt. "It is not a commodity you can put in a fridge and use when it's convenient for you." I lay there, trying to grasp the reality of it through the haze of shock. The document Julian had forced me to sign to control the situation had just backfired. "Who?" I whispered. "Who got my kidney?" Bennett turned to me, and his gaze softened. "The recipient gave permission to reveal his identity to the donor. He wants to thank you personally. His name is Harrison Sterling." The name echoed in the small room like a thunderclap. I didn't know him personally, but everyone in the Southeast knew the name. The founder of Sterling Development Group, the man who owned half the skyline of Atlanta, one of the wealthiest philanthropists in the country. There had been rumors that he had retreated from public life due to a mystery illness. Now we knew why. Julian's knees buckled. He grabbed the bed frame of the neighboring patient to keep from falling. His lips moved, silently repeating the billionaire's name. His textile business and his little estate were nothing compared to a man like Sterling. "Mr. Sterling's assistant asked me to convey," Bennett continued, speaking only to me now, "that he wishes to move you to a private executive suite immediately. He wants to personally thank the woman who saved his life." I looked at the three people by the door, the people who, a minute ago, radiated triumph, and who now stood with faces white with terror. Julian's tactic changed instantly. His voice became honeyed, pleading. "Amani, honey, forget about those papers. It was a joke, a test. We were just overwhelmed." He reached for my hand, and I yanked it away so hard the pain flared in my side like a hot iron. I didn't make a sound. I just turned to the doctor and spoke with a voice I didn't know I possessed, firm, calm, and ice cold. "Doctor, please call security. There are strangers in my room." Security arrived within a minute. They escorted a struggling Julian out. They wheeled out a cursing Beatrice. Sienna followed behind, her heels clicking on the linoleum, her diamond ring no longer looking quite so bright. The door closed, and the room went silent. The move to the executive suite on the top floor took less than an hour. The contrast was so sharp, I barely believed it. A wide window with a view of the city, a leather sofa for guests, a private bathroom, a large screen on the wall. Harrison Sterling's chief of staff, Marcus Whitaker, a sharp man with observant gray eyes, informed me that all medical expenses and recovery costs would be covered by the Sterling Foundation. "Why?" I asked, tears flowing again, not from pain, but from the crushing weight of the contrast. "For Mr. Sterling, your gift is a second chance to see the sun rise over Georgia," Marcus replied. "He always pays his debts, always." A week later, when I could sit up without sharp pain, I was visited by Thomas Reed, the head of Sterling's legal department, a man who looked like he had won 1,000 court cases and lost none. He laid out a folder of documents on my table. "Your husband made a mistake, Amani," Thomas said quietly. "During your 2 years of marriage, he registered several assets in your name, a warehouse in Savannah, a stake in his textile factory, a commercial property in Midtown, even the Alpharetta house. He wanted to shield his assets from creditors and the IRS. He was certain you would always be under his control." I listened, unable to believe my ears. Now, by filing for divorce without a claim for asset division, he is legally forfeiting his right to everything held in your name. My advice, sign the divorce papers quietly. Don't mention the assets. Let the court decree become final. The man who had called me a naive fool had walked right into the trap of his own arrogance. My meeting with Harrison Sterling took place 3 weeks later on the rooftop garden of the clinic. He was about 70, and even in his weakened state, wrapped in a blanket in a wicker chair, he radiated power. "So this is the girl," he said, looking at me from under gray brows. "The woman who gave a part of herself to a demon, only for fate to redirect the gift to me." He spoke directly. He told me he had researched my story, from the foster home to the betrayal. He said he saw something in me that reminded him of his granddaughter who had passed away 10 years ago. "The money from Julian's assets is a start," he continued, "but without the skill to manage it, it will vanish like mist. The world is cruel, Amani. A good person without teeth will be eaten alive." He reached out a wrinkled hand. "Let me be your mentor. Legally, we can arrange an adult adoption. It's just a name change on paper, but in reality, it's family. Enter my world, learn from me, and become a woman who can look at her former husband and see not a giant, but a pathetic insect." I remembered Beatrice's sneers. I remembered Sienna's smile. I remembered Julian's cold eyes. If I went back to the world as just Amani Collier, without help, they would find a way to crush me again. I took Harrison Sterling's hand. My grip was stronger than anyone would expect from a woman who had been on an operating table 3 weeks prior. "Teach me," I said. "Teach me how to destroy them." Sterling smiled wide, a predatory glint in his eyes. The months that followed were relentless. 5 in the morning meant physical therapy. 7 meant breakfast with Harrison, reading the Wall Street Journal. Why did the tech sector dip? How does that affect real estate? From 9 to 3, I had private tutors in management, corporate law, and public speaking. From 4 to 7, I sat in on real negotiations at Sterling's offices. I threw myself into my studies with the fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. My community college accounting background was a solid foundation. I just never had the chance to build on it. Every lesson was a brick in the wall of my new identity. I learned to read financial reports, to understand market mechanics, to hold my own among people with power. At night, I sometimes cried from exhaustion. The scar on my side ached before the rain, but in the morning, I got up and kept going. The external changes reflected the internal. My hair was styled into an elegant, sharp bob. My baggy clothes were replaced by bespoke suits from the best tailors. But the real change was in my eyes. No more begging for approval. No more foster kid fear of being unwanted. Only the sharp, analytical gaze of a woman who knew her worth. The reports from Thomas Reed arrived every week. The divorce had been finalized 4 months ago. A judge had signed the decree in a single session, not asking questions about the sudden split. Julian, meanwhile, was planning a lavish wedding with Sienna. A 500-guest gala, a designer dress from Milan, and rings from a jeweler who serviced the Atlanta elite. Beatrice's health, however, was in steady decline. Dialysis 3 times a week, cardiac complications, the bills were piling up. Over $50,000 a month just to keep her stable. He started selling the cars, Thomas reported at one meeting. The Porsche went first, then the G-Wagon. Word on the street is that Vane Textiles is looking for a major investor to cover a massive cash flow gap. He's desperate. I turned toward the window. The lights of Atlanta stretched to the horizon. Then we give him an investor, create a shell company, Phoenix Investments, no visible link to the Sterling Group, a Delaware registration, nominee directors. What is the end game? Thomas asked, pen ready. Not to buy his company, that's too quick, too merciful. No, we're going to put a golden noose around his neck, one he will happily tighten himself, thinking it's a life preserver. The invitation to an exclusive black-tie gala for Sterling Development investors arrived for Julian via courier 2 weeks later. A heavy, gold-embossed envelope. It hinted at a potential partnership with a promising textile manufacturer. He didn't ask why a giant like Sterling was suddenly interested in his sinking business. He didn't check who was behind Phoenix Investments. He only saw the zeros on a potential check and was already calculating how many problems he could solve. The restaurant on the top floor of the Westin Peachtree Plaza was glowing that evening. Hundreds of lights reflected in crystal glasses and diamonds. Julian stood at the bar adjusting his cufflinks, scanning the room for the representatives of the investment fund. Harrison Sterling stepped onto the small stage and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the new CEO of Phoenix Investments, my associate, Amani Sterling." I walked down the stairs in an emerald green silk gown. A diamond necklace, a gift from Harrison for completing my training, shimmered around my neck. My voice, as I spoke about seeking partners with clean reputations and transparent records, was steady and firm. Sienna's glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, drawing the eyes of everyone nearby. Julian stood frozen, forgetting to breathe. The woman they had left to die in a public ward was now the head of the most powerful investment firm in the region, the host of the evening, the center of every gaze. "That's impossible," Sienna whispered, grabbing Julian's sleeve. "We have to leave, now." "Wait." Julian brushed her hand away. "She loved me once. Maybe she still does. This is our chance, don't you see?" He pushed through the crowd and called my name. I turned. My face was a mask of polite void. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Amani, it's me, Julian. Your husband." I tilted my head slightly. "Ah, yes, Mr. Vane. I've read your file. My analyst prepared it. Falling revenue, overdue debt, a massive cash flow gap. Interesting. Come to my office on Monday. We'll discuss possibilities. But be warned, only business. No personal topics." On Monday, Julian sat at the far end of a long mahogany conference table, surrounded by lawyers and analysts who shredded his falsified financial report in minutes. The numbers didn't match the bank statements. The vendors didn't exist. The revenue had been inflated overnight. Despite all this, I paused, letting the silence hang over the room. "We are prepared to invest $2 million. Julian looked up, unable to believe his luck. "A convertible loan," I continued. collateralized by all shares of the company and the personal assets of the borrower. If sales targets aren't met in 3 months, everything transfers to Phoenix Investments. Surely a professional like you, Mr. Vane, is confident in his own abilities." He signed it without a second thought, desperate to lock in the deal. After he left, Thomas Reed didn't hide his grin. "He just took a loan against assets that, by court decree, belong to you, Amani. The Savannah warehouse, the Midtown property, the Alpharetta house. Attempting to pledge someone else's property as collateral is bank fraud. That's a federal offense, 10 to 20 years. I leaned back in my chair. "And the targets we set? They're impossible. We've already blocked his main distribution channels by pressuring his key clients." The file on Sienna arrived a week later. Photos, bank statements, medical records. Sienna at romantic dinners with a man named Trey, a local club owner with a criminal record. Regular transfers from Julian's company accounts to Trey's accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And most importantly, the pregnancy timeline. Sienna was 20 weeks pregnant. I did the simple math. Conception happened 4.5 months ago. During that week, Julian had been in New York at a textile expo for 7 days straight. Security footage from an Atlanta hotel showed Sienna and Trey entering and leaving a room daily during that same period. "The child isn't his," I noted, closing the folder. Sienna planned to bleed him dry and run off with her lover as soon as she got access to a large enough sum, Marcus confirmed. A classic scheme. Julian, emboldened by the contract, invited me to dinner to celebrate the partnership. A restaurant in an old historic mansion. Candles, white tablecloths, live music. He turned on the charm, confessing his regret like a man haunted by his conscience. "My mother pressured me, you have to understand. She was always so controlling. And Sienna, she was a mistake, a burden I'm ready to drop. I always loved you, Amani. I'm ready to leave her tomorrow, put my mother in a state home, anything to have you back." The digital recorder in my purse caught every word, every inflection, every betrayal. "I'll think about it," I said, standing up and draping my coat over my shoulders. "Enjoy your dinner, Julian. It might be the last one you have at this level." The 3 months expired in mid-March. The team from Phoenix Investments arrived at Julian's office with security and federal agents. He was sitting at his desk, confident in yet another forged report showing a 200% sales increase. But the audit revealed empty warehouses, idle machinery, and ghost contracts. "The FBI is in the lobby," Thomas said, packing the documents. "Bank fraud, wire fraud. You're looking at a very long time, Mr. Vane." Julian bolted through the back exit to his car, racing to the hospital to say goodbye to his mother before the inevitable arrest. In Beatrice's room, he found Sienna frantically stuffing his watches and gold cufflinks into her designer bag. What are you doing?" he gasped. "Leaving, you idiot, before the feds get here. I'm not going down with you." The door opened, and I walked in, wearing a white suit, calm and cold as a Georgia winter. I dropped a folder on the floor, and the photos scattered. Sienna with Trey. Bank transfers, medical records. Julian grabbed the photos. His face turned a deep, angry purple. "The baby? It's not mine?" "Type O blood," I said without expression. "You're type A. Sienna is type B. Basic genetics, Julian. High school biology." He struck Sienna across the face with such force she flew against the wall. She screamed, "You're a loser! Your mother is a fossil! I hate you both! I've always hated you!" Then I pulled out my phone and played the recording from our dinner. Julian's voice filled the room. "Sienna is a burden. The baby was a mistake. I'll put my mother in a home. She's a nuisance with her illnesses." Beatrice, hooked up to her machines, heard every word. Her son, the one for whom she had humiliated me, the one for whom she had demanded my kidney, was planning to discard her like old furniture. The monitors began to beep frantically. The old woman gasped, reaching a bony hand toward me, clawing at the air. "Help me, daughter. Please." I walked to the bed and looked at that hand, the same hand that had waved dismissively when she called me a charity case. My kidney was a gift of love, I said. I would have given it to the mother I lost when I was 9. You are not my mother, Beatrice. You are the woman who ordered her son to divorce me while I was in the ICU, bleeding and wondering if I would live. The monitor flatlined into a long, high-pitched whistle. Julian was sobbing on the floor. Beatrice's heart hadn't just failed from kidney disease. It had broken from the betrayal of the only thing she loved. I turned and walked out of the room, never looking back at the chaos behind me. The arrest happened 2 days later at his mother's funeral. The ceremony was pathetic. A few distant relatives, the funeral home staff. News of the bankruptcy and the criminal case had turned the Vanes into pariahs. Sienna had been picked up at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, trying to board a flight to Dubai with a suitcase full of cash. As the casket was being lowered into the damp Georgia red clay, 2 plainclothes agents approached Julian. The handcuffs clicked shut right there by the grave. They were leading him to the car when he noticed a black Mercedes parked on the cemetery lane. The tinted window lowered a few inches. There, in sunglasses despite the overcast day, sat I. I looked at him without malice, without triumph. I looked at him like a finished painting, a closed chapter. The window slid back up. The car moved and disappeared around the bend. A year later, I stood at a small cemetery in Macon before 2 modest headstones of gray granite. I placed white lilies on my parents' graves, now well-maintained, with trimmed grass and fresh flowers. I spoke to them softly, telling them how much my life had changed, how I now helped people in similar situations, paying for treatments for those who couldn't afford them, hiring lawyers for those being cheated. The scar on my left side had faded into a thin, pale line. I used to hate it. I used to see it as a symbol of my own naivety. Now I saw it as a medal, proof that I had walked through hell, hit rock bottom, and clawed my way back up, stronger and wiser. Am I interrupting? I turned at the familiar voice. Dr. Bennett stood on the path with 2 cups of coffee. He was in jeans and a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up. Mr. Sterling asked me to remind you, don't stay out too long. There's a board meeting tomorrow. Tell him thank you for the concern, I smiled. Bennett hesitated. Amani, do you have time for dinner? Not a business dinner, just dinner between us. I looked at him, the man who had protected me that day in the hospital, who had checked on me every evening while I was recovering. In his eyes, there was no calculation, only sincere admiration. How do you feel about some hole-in-the-wall BBQ in downtown? I asked. Or do you need white tablecloths? He laughed, a warm, open sound, and reached out his hand. We walked down the path together, shoulder to shoulder. The sun was setting over the Georgia hills, painting the sky in gold. It would set, leaving the world in darkness, but tomorrow it would surely rise again. And so would I.